Marvel's steady decline in quality since 2021 has been a hard watch for longtime fans, as we've been alienated and spit in the face with identity politics, being called every instant foe by the newer generation of fans and those behind the camera. We just wanted characters to be respected and stories that would grip us.
Not to be suffocated by all this fucking politicking.
They decided to end the financial disaster phase with Wakanda Forever, a sequel to the 2016 film Black Panther that had lots of issues and is an average movie, but broke through due to its huge cultural impact. With the tragic, unexpected passing of Chadwick Boseman, Marvel was left with slim choices concerning the sequel that still moved ahead, and all of us wondered how the story would deal with the event.
Well, what's the first thing an actor learns? The show must go on.
Well, the time has come. Going into the film, I didn't have any expectations. Marvel constantly disappoints, so it's always best to go in blind. Although the film does have some major issues, it is one of the best films of Phase 4, which really doesn't say a lot considering everything except the second half of No Way Home was horribly written sludge. Here's a spoiler warning for you guys, you have been warned. Wakanda Forever picks up at the death of T'Challa, who passed away because of an illness, Shuri being unable to save him due to the lack of heart-shaped herb previously burnt by Killmonger. The nation is now without a protector, and its main resource is constantly being demanded by other countries, who go as far as infiltrate Wakandan bases to steal vibranium. In search of the resource, the US gets their hand on a vibranium detector and finds some in the Atlantic Ocean, angering Namor, king of Talokan, who fears that his home underwater may be found if surface dwellers know there's vibranium elsewhere than Wakanda. Namor brings an ultimatum to the Wakandan queen: give him the scientist that made the vibranium detector or he'll wreak havoc on the nation. Okoye and Shuri find the scientist, who turns out to be Ironheart, but the latter two are kidnapped by Namor. Both Shuri and Namor start exchanging about their lives and find out
you and I are not so different.
While Shuri and Riri Williams are escaping with the help of Nakia, they kill Talokans, prompting Namor to attack Wakanda and ends up murdering the queen. When the dust clears, Shuri is able to build one of the herbs and becomes the Black Panther, taking the fight to Namor at sea with revenge in mind. They end up fighting and it basically ends like this.
Save Martha!
With an actual montage of all their similarities cross-cutting with the scene. The Talokan and Wakandan people part ways, with Shuri now the queen and Riri Williams sent back to the US. We do find out in the post-credits scene that Nakia and T'Challa had a son, whose name is also T'Challa, that he kept away due to the burden of royal duties he'd have. The plot has 4 major issues: pacing, characters, the core emotional component, and of course all the lack of consistency, with major elements happening because of convenience. The film is strongest in its first half hour, just before Riri Williams gets introduced, and in its final minutes, which brings us to one of the aforementioned issues, the core emotional component stemming from T'Challa, but mostly Chadwick's real-life tragedy with cancer. The film feels like it exploits his death in a predatory manner at times, where instead of T'Challa having died in battle or something around those lines, we're constantly referencing the real-life circumstances where he died from an illness. Shuri even says, "My brother suffered in silence, but when he finally asked me to help, I couldn't," and on other occasions telling us that the king is dead, the Black Panther is gone, tying into the real-world fact that everyone considered Boseman as the Black Panther, the king of Wakanda. But with what was established in the first film, he was just another king and just another Black Panther in the long line of successions, which makes the fact that even 1 year after his death in the film, the repetitive saying that he was basically the one true king comes off as profiting off Boseman's death in some capacity, really proving that they should have done what Chadwick wanted and recast. It comes off more as a manipulation than a well-written narrative. If you don't believe Disney would use the death at their benefit,
And I got news for you.
they used his Twitter account to promote this film. The only time I felt an actual tribute was during the opening Marvel logo, which was filled with Chadwick and T'Challa quotes, and of course the other actors' true pain, as I said before, at the beginning and the end having to deal with his death head on. I'll elaborate more on the characters later, but I needed to talk about Riri Williams' Iron Man suit. She already has a makeshift suit when we first meet her, which prompts some major questions like how did she get the materials needed? Tony was a billionaire and had Jarvis. Riri said that there's an entire YouTube channel dedicated to her sightings. Why isn't she on anyone's radar, considering the FBI already bought or most likely took her vibranium detector that she made for metallurgy class for fun? raising even more questions. She can also pilot it up to over 10,000 feet with no helmet, and this film does not seem to think wind resistance exists. And on top of that, her suit is weaponized, which gives the FBI even more reason to get involved into literally everything she does. Also, talk about characterization. The first fight we see her in, she drops a drone on about half a dozen cops, nearly killing them with a smirk, and literally times it by saying, "I'll have a special delivery for you in 3, 2, 1. The pacing of the film really shows that the 2.5-hour runtime was unnecessary, and I think it would have benefited from a tight 120 minutes. Lots of scenes could have been sped up, trimmed, or cut entirely, most of it being needless exposition that should have been embedded in the action, because most of the film feels like exposition action. And it's not helped by the flimsy character motivations on almost everyone's side, making already boring exposition even more tedious, coupled with recycled jokes from the first film that are dragged on, feeling like Ghostbusters 2016.
That stuff went everywhere, by the way, in every crack. Very hard to wash off.
Now, let's move on to the lack of consistency and overabundance of convenience, with turning points coming out of nowhere. My first example is the Tolokans that can or cannot be killed. The film shows them as immortal right off the bat in their first 2 appearances, where they suffer critical hits by spear and gun but revive like zombies, until we see them for the rest of the film getting one-shotted like it's Call of Duty on veteran mode. To enter Wakanda, the soldiers have to drum a specific pattern on water, I guess? No, seriously, they drum water to open the gate. At least they beefed up security and you can't just walk in. Oh, wait, that's exactly what Namor and his entire army do.
You serious?
Shuri's AI has been beefed up as well and can basically do anything, which I'll admit is on par with Jarvis back around phase 1 in Iron Man 2. Also on par is how she's able to recreate the heart-shaped herb with a strand of another herb that turned Namor's people into mermen centuries ago, that Namor himself gave her for, reasons? I don't feel like this should be acceptable so far into the MCU, but I'll admit Iron Man did the same when he created a new element from a map. During the final fight, the Wakandans decide to fight fish people on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, this big brain time.
They use the Great Wall technique to fend off attackers, and I'd just like to point out that Nerd Explained said it was a stupid technique and he knows his shit. Shuri also built a suit for the Dora Milaje that is equivalent to an Iron Man suit. There are loads of other things I could deconstruct to show how it destroys the film, but let's move on to the positives. The film seems to have actually learned from the critiques of 2018's Black Panther, albeit not giving proper solutions at times, but at least acknowledging them and trying to work on it. The costumes were great, especially the Talokan army. Namor and Ironheart, not so much. The Talokan death chant was also very eerie and well done. I actually praised the first half hour, which, as I said before, was the strongest part. Setting up characters and intrigue in a compelling way while dealing with T'Challa's death, giving us the strongest performances, but it all degraded once the scientist plot kicked in, not knowing how to divide time between storylines and characters, and basically ends up feeling like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but with less subplots. On the character side, we mainly have Queen Ramonda, Shuri, Riri Williams, Namor, and Okoye, with M'Baku and Ross being slightly major secondary characters. M'Baku was one of, if not the best character of the film. This man was the voice of reason throughout, mixed with Winston Duke's overflowing charisma, plus he gave the funniest line of the movie calling Okoye a bald-headed demon. He actually had the most impact on the main characters apart from T'Challa's looming presence, ushering Shuri and Ramonda in the right direction when needed most. M'Baku wasn't in it much, but when he was, managed to catch my dwindling attention. Riri Williams was the worst character of the film, up there with Namor. Let me put it bluntly, Ironheart in this film feels like this, and I mean it in the nicest way possible. Imagine having a nice meal and the fly just keeps trying to annoy you. You want to finish the meal, but the fly always keeps coming back without a purpose. The film could have had the same outcome with a random NPC scientist, first of all, and it didn't need to be Ironheart. Secondly, her character acts as if she got dropped off the set of a sitcom, constantly joking and not acting accordingly in regard to her situation. Just look at her introduction, for example. She gets cornered in her dorm room by Shuri and Okoye, who she knows as the Princess of Wakanda and Dora Milaje, but decides to make jokes of the serious threats on her life. Riri Williams is also the perfect example of strong modern female character, where we're constantly told that she's the best, the smartest, even built her first machine at age 3. But guess what? We literally never see her build anything, except the Ironheart suit, but even then, it's cross-cut with Shuri reconstructing the heart-shaped herb, so basically the tiny glimpses we saw of her doing it in the trailer is all we get, showing us how smart and great she is.
Word.
Child geniuses can work. Take example on Child Emperor from the One Punch Man manga. Despite his genius constantly being brought to the table, he backs it up, remains likable, and lays his life on the line to protect others. Nothing like that happens from Ironheart. The actress playing Riri Williams is really miscast, always one note and missing the screen presence needed, fading in the background every time it's supposed to be her time to shine. Queen Ramonda was a worthy addition, proving they should have used her more in the first installment because Angela Bassett steals the show with a performance coming straight from the heart. Her juxtaposition with Shuri on moving on from T'Challa's death, where she represents tradition and spirituality while Shuri's science and rationale, should have been the main theme explored in depth, but felt left out to include more Namor scenes. Namor, as I said before, was one of the worst parts of the film. Not only did his character motivations make no sense, so even if you tried to agree, you really couldn't get on board, his character design was one of the laziest I've seen. Not only does it look bad, but it doesn't make Namor feel menacing in the slightest. His winged ankles also remain unintentionally funny throughout. Don't get me wrong, his character introduction is actually quite interesting, but once we get to know more of him, the actor becomes one note and he just turns into less of a character, with our emotional attachment made to stem from Namor's hate of the surface world and love for his mother that is barely explored. When the two generals that have a total 4 minutes of runtime and barely speak are more interesting than the main villain, there's a problem. Shuri is the star of the show, the film revolving around how she deals with her brother's death and something about her similarities with Namor. I don't know, and the writers don't really know either. It felt more like a way to manufacture stakes and emotional payoff than craft an actual fleshed out narrative. Her taking the Black Panther mantle does actually feel somewhat earned. I say somewhat because all the emotional components of a hero's journey are there, even if they're not very well executed, but when it came to her working for it, there was a void as everything was given to her, which is one of the biggest flaws when it comes to her character. As the viewer, you're more inclined to believe she deserves everything due to the film's emotional manipulation, when in reality not only does she not earn it, but she isn't in the right mental state either to be considered as the protector of Wakanda. They did try exploring her quench for vengeance, but it fell flat and felt tacked on last minute, rather than a natural build-up of hate towards Namor. Letitia Wright stepped up her game and delivered, although would have benefited from better dialogue, much like most of the cast, and man, we need her to hit the gym and take the Jessica Biel route to make her more believable as the Black Panther in the long run. The score isn't actually pushed forward like it's been in quite a bit of Phase 4, favoring the soundtrack instead, although being mostly used during the end and beginning of the film when the most poignant scenes happen. Even then, the score doesn't manipulate you into being sad. The script does that enough with the use of Boseman's passing, like I stated before. That being said, the soundtrack itself is all over the place, reminiscent of 2016's Suicide Squad, with songs not matching events or being too on the nose with their lyrics in context of the story, pulling you out of an already hard to get in narrative. On the cinematography side, it's actually a good looking film with an interesting color palette. Some scenes do suffer from bad CGI, but not as much as almost all of Phase 4, and has better effects than the first film. Last night I watched the 1989 classic The Abyss, and it actually makes the underwater deep diving scenes in Wakanda Forever look amateur. There's even the same scene where Namor shows Shuri Talokan, his city, which is basically a copy-paste of the final 15 minutes of The Abyss. No, seriously, it's a copy even down to the whirlpool concept they go through. There were other scenes that clearly looked like they were filmed on a built set, and the Iron Man HUDs looked pretty lazy. Other than that, it does have some good fight scenes, the best probably being Shuri and Okoye being ambushed by the Talokan people. I literally made a section on the use of slow motion a couple of weeks ago in my Dredd Analysis, so I'll just point out that just because slow motion makes explosions look cool, doesn't mean that you have to use them all the damn time.
This is Sparta!
Did I personally enjoy the film? Overall, no. The pacing, an uninspiring villain coupled with Ironheart's unnecessary character introduction and childish dialogue were enough to put me off after the first half hour. What I did thoroughly enjoy were some of the individual scenes, mainly Okoye being stripped of her position, her first fight with Namor's main commanders, the speech Queen Ramonda gives at the UN was badass, and Shuri being used as a serious character, not just quipping her way around the movie, is a plus. In the end, Wakanda Forever was a lackluster film that at times managed to strike poignant notes when dealing with T'Challa and Boseman's death, sometimes feeling more like a manipulation of his passing rather than using narrative to do so, nonetheless boasting some great performances. But when looking past the surface, nothing remains except for a good-looking movie and interesting isolated scenes that sadly can't make up for most of the 2.5-hour runtime. It's definitely not Marvel's best film ever, so don't believe those who say so, and it's absolutely not the worst Marvel product either, so don't listen to that.
This is a lie. You have been lied to.
I'd like to end by saying thank you all for watching and sticking around this long. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do subscribe and drop a like if you did, and hopefully, I'll see you all next time.